We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to eradicating human slavery, human trafficking, child exploitation, and child sexual abuse material through disrupting networks and applying data technology and advanced analytics and intelligence.
All right, welcome everybody to the Anti-Human Trafficking Intelligence Initiative, third annual summit. We're just happy to have you all. And today, man, we have a very, very special treat. Today with us, we have Kevin Metcalf, Mr. Jeff Blum, and Ren from Lantern Rescue. We'll start off with Ren's bio. Ren is the founder and CEO of Lantern Rescue, a U.S.-based 501c3 nonprofit organization that rescues victims of human trafficking internationally. Ren and her organization focus on creating counter-human trafficking task forces organically with law enforcement agencies and those of our partner nations. Lantern Rescue holds the belief that there is no one better situated to protect the most vulnerable than their fellow citizens. In addition to training and equipping the teams, Ren and Lantern Rescue are engaged in the prosecution of traffickers and facilitating aftercare connections to ensure continued care and rehab for survivors of human trafficking. We also have Jeff Blum from the University of New Haven. Mr. Blum has over 33 years of law enforcement, investigative, and teaching experience. Former chief of police, has served in executive leadership, consulted with non-government organizations, working on combating human trafficking around the world. 17 years of international and domestic counter-human trafficking experience at an operational and strategic level. Mr. Blum has conducted hundreds of investigations in over 40 countries, working closely with LE and victim-centered intervention methods. Holds an MA in intelligence studies, an adjunct professor with a master's in investigations program at the University of New Haven. Currently teaches human trafficking investigation and analytics and has trained law enforcement and other forces in 20 different countries. He has been recognized with the U.S. Attorney's Office, Immigration and Customs Enforcement for his work specifically in Cambodia. And Mr. Blum is an expert witness for the United States Attorney in child sex trafficking cases. Authored and co-authored several articles. It's really, really great to have you. Also joining us, Mr. Kevin Metcalf, CEO of the NCPTF, National Child Protection Task Force. Kevin is a former federal agent turned prosecutor and founder of the NCPTF. The NCPTF brings together experts in legal strategy, OSINT, geospatial mapping and analysis, dark web cryptocurrency, image geo analysis, and more, just to aid law enforcement agencies around the world on those cases, involving missing, exploited, and trafficked children. Kevin has assisted with the recovery of countless missing and exploited children and the identification and apprehension of sexual predators in multiple countries. He is considered an international leader in innovative approaches to synthesizing legal, closed, and open source intelligence to support missing person recovery, child exploitation, and the counter-human trafficking cases worldwide. Wow. Thank you guys. Thank you all just for being here. And appreciate you taking the time to join us and just addressing, the summit participants and everybody that just, I myself really deeply admire and respect all of you for everything you do. And I am mostly honored also to call you a partner, in these efforts. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Guidel.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll get right to it. And these questions, as we ask them, again, we're just looking for everybody's input, which is super important. The perspectives you each bring is, I know people would love just to pick your brain on all of this. So we'll start off with Ren, and work it off, pass it off to Kevin and then Jeff. So Ren, in your opinion, what are the biggest challenges faced by organizations, or your org even, in working on the anti-trafficking and child exploitation recovery operations? And better yet, how are you addressing them?
I would say one of the biggest challenges is with endurance of people that are coming into this space. So a lot of people come in and they're very excited, and it's a very emotional topic, and people get really passionate about it. But you'll see operators and other organizations and countries kind of lose that momentum. So the endurance of when you're in this work, committing to it and really following it through to the end, I would say that's probably one of the biggest challenges faced. And the way that we combat that is by really vetting who we're working with. And when we're going into a country to set up a new task force and to vet that local law enforcement agency and the people there, just really looking at each individual operator and who we're going to be putting our time, money, and resources into, and ensuring that to the fullest that they can be, that they're committed and that they're going to be able to have the endurance for the long run, not just like a long one night operation, but like over years, months. Can they stick with this work? Is this something they're going to stay passionate about, or is it something that they're just excited about in the moment?
Yeah, lost there for a little bit. We'll pass it on to Kevin. Thank you, Ren.
Sorry about that.
Good.
Yeah, the biggest challenge is there are so many organizations out here in the human trafficking space, and we see a lot of them. And one of the big things that really hit me is how everybody tries to be everything in one organization. They try to do it all. So, so when I was talking to Tebow about this, said, imagine you put a football team together, you get all your MVPs. Everybody's got their strength that they're known for, how they got started in this. And if you pull a quarterback and your offensive line, defensive line, you don't want your defensive end trained to be a backup quarterback. You want them trained to be the best defensive end they've got. So that's why we look. The challenge is staying in your depth, staying with your focus. Our focus is only on cyber. And on my background, I'm very comfortable going in with Lantern or Sentinel, some of these other groups we support. I'm very comfortable with shooting, all the ground operations and all that from my previous life, but our depth is in cyber, and that's why we support Lantern, we support Sentinel, we support Operation Light Shine, we work with ATII. We have our focus and our depth, and that's where we try to stay, and that allows Lantern to do what they do best. They shouldn't have to be worried about, well, do we need to hire analysts who can do this? Do we need to hire people to do this job over here? We got asked by one of the state AGs if we could take over some of this data scraping stuff. I said, no, we're not doing that. We're not diluting our mission by doing that, because there are other orgs out here. I'll just pull them in. So the collaboration is a key aspect here, and that's going to be the next evolution in this. Any of these organizations out here who say, I'm all you need, that's just nonsense. So we got to have more collaboration. Everybody's got to start playing to their depth, and everybody's got to come together and start working that way.
Yeah, awesome. No, great answer, and I can understand that, because we've been asked the same thing at ATII. I was like, well, can you do this? Can you do like, well, let's stay in our lane, right? So yeah, appreciate that answer. Jeff, please. What's your take
sure.
on
No, I'd
this?
love to speak into it. I mean, been doing this for 17, almost 18 years now, and Ren and Kevin are both right. I mean, in the beginning, there was no talk about self-care for individuals, no way of dealing with some of these stresses and things, and I saw agents and individuals burn out very quickly dealing with these traumas day in and day out. Same way, if a person couldn't get working with an organization, they just started their own organization. So, what I said, the world didn't need another NGO. We just need to start collaborating. And as Kevin rightly pointed out, we each have a specialty. We need to stay in our wheelhouse, work together, and collaborate. We've all heard the word network warfare. The criminals are winning because they got a bigger resource network. Until we start working together and doing that, which I'm seeing now, coming together with many different specialties, many different opportunities, then we're going to actually start defeating the criminals. some of the biggest challenges I've come across doing this work is mainly law enforcement buy-in, whether domestic or internationally. As soon as you get boots on the ground and you go over there, first of all, you got to build that rapport and respect with the law enforcement. Particularly internationally, you got to be careful of corruption. There's cases where I've investigated where the police are actually protecting the brothels and locations where the girls are being trafficked. And so, yeah, you have to be careful with that. And so some of the ways I've been able to deal with that is I've spoken at many conferences where you have law enforcement NGO relationships. And I've spoken because I've worked in both sectors. I understand from the NGO perspective, I understand from the law enforcement perspective. So that gives me a unique opportunity to speak in and start building those bridges of trust and respect. And then, of course, domestically, we have a pretty good programs going on with our task forces, but internationally, I'm sure as Ren can speak into this as well, they don't exist internationally. I mean, you have local law enforcement, you have different organizations, but again, they're all individuals pushing for their own agendas and programs and not really working together.
Yeah. Wow. 100% dead on. And from what I've seen working a lot of the stuff in Mexico, you know, sometimes law enforcement is the clientele to these, organizations or chains, or, that they're like, well, I'll give you whatever you want as long as you protect me from anybody else kind of coming and snooping around. So yeah, those are huge challenges. Thank you for answering that. Ren, we'll come back to you. Of course, keeping with confidentiality, in mind, what is it, or what can you answer when it's how do you work with law enforcement agencies to identify and rescue victims of human trafficking and child exploitation?
So internationally, we're working with the local law enforcement. So whatever that is, internationally, they have more of a national jurisdiction. It's not as segmented as we're used to here in the United States. So we'll work with them. We'll go in and train them. And like I said a little bit earlier, we'll vet them and we'll create these counter trafficking task forces that are trained to understand what trafficking is. And a lot of countries, they're unaware of trafficking or they don't understand the gravity of it. So that's a hurdle you have to cross first. And then once they know what that is, then they are able to pick it up like a drug interdiction cop can here in the States. They're able to see the signs and able to understand more of what that looks like. So once they get tips, or they might get tips maybe from people in the community, or they, someone that saw something, or they know where to look. Once they know what trafficking is and they understand it, a lot of them will be like, oh, I know exactly where to find that. And once they put those pieces together, we're able to get those tips and get those cases and work through it. And it looks different in every country. Some of our operations are more proactive, where we're going out and we're seeking out tips, we're seeking out brothels, we're seeking out stuff like that. And then other ones are more reactive, where we have a station set up on the border and we're watching what's crossing. What does that look like? And it's very country dependent. It's very situation dependent on what their abilities are and what the trafficking environment looks like in that particular area. So it's really dependent, but a lot of it we lead. Our model is to allow law enforcement to lead as much as we can in those countries, because we want them to be doing that even when we're not there. So we let them lead, and then we encourage them and we help guide them through the process.
Awesome. Yeah, let them lead. That's huge. Yeah, thank you for that. Kevin, over to you.
Yeah, so how do we support law enforcement identification? So on the rescuing, we don't necessarily do that much, but we try to get Lantern and some of these other groups or law enforcement themselves on target. And we, again, focus on the cyber side of things. So we're looking at identifying networks. So we may be using facial recognition if some of the teams we're working with are running ground surveillance and sending pictures back. So we may take facial recognition and start identifying other social media accounts, start digging into that. And if we're working with depends on the level also of engagement with law enforcement at that point. And as a prosecutor, and two prosecutors here at least, we may be trying to build towards that probable cause. We have enough now to go get a search warrant, have enough now to get something. So it kind of depends on where we're at, because we also specialize in legal process. In what do you ask for, how do you ask for it, and what do you do when you get it back? And HSI, Jim Cole has repeatedly told me to stop calling it open source intelligence, because we don't do that. But what we do is all source intelligence. So it's kind of that blending. And quite honestly, I've got people now full time focused on that are some of the top in their field. And quite honestly, I wake up every day wondering what it is we're missing. What do we not know today? Because technology is advancing so fast that we're trying to stay in the game, trying to stay active in these investigations, and then trying to work with all these other NGOs and support them. And every time we do it, we're learning something new. So, the way that we're supporting that is through cyber. We're expanding the network of predators, expanding the network of human traffickers, and also identifying victims. And it's sometimes just a never-ending chain. I know you guys know that. It's one thing leads to another, and then it's a spider web. Every one of them expands out. So a lot of times I'm spending a lot of my time pulling my guys back. So, we can only go so far down this rabbit hole. We keep identifying other people, but without the resources and people to work these things, so you're just limited. But that's it.
No, 100%. And you have to stay on top of it. I'd like to think, with the universities that have asked us to make certifications for them, or that we're working their specific, training material for law enforcement or stuff like that, we have to have that tech upskill contingency, because the tech changes so fast, and you want to stay on top of what's the latest and greatest, right? Yeah, absolutely. Jeff, over to you.
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, similar to Ren, I mean, when you go into a foreign country, particularly, the first thing you got to do is build a rapport with the officers, build that level of trust. And a lot of that is done through either providing a simple 1-day or 2-hour seminar, all the way up to where I've done, 16-week training programs for the Cambodian police before. And so going in there and developing those relationships, give them a training, but what they're doing is we're training them on how to actually do the work. And so as we're doing the training, I do half the classroom and half field ops when we're doing this. And so that allows me time to teach them the theoretical stuff in class and take them out and actually work on live cases. And that does two things for me. One, it gives me the opportunity to see if they're actually listening to me and applying the information. Second of all, is, can I trust them? Are they actually doing the work? Or are they hiding information and not willing to go in? So I know what level of operation I'm willing to take them on before we don't want to take them on a very sensitive operation on this area. So we slowly build into more sensitive cases as we build the trust and respect with each other and go on through. And so then after we do the training, we start providing minor investigative support services. We'll go in, help them detect victims. We'll go in, collect minor pieces of evidence as long as they're willing, and depending on what their local laws are that allow us to use different pieces of equipment to go in and collect audio, video, other things, or place cameras. And so we start building up relations through that until we're actually sometimes even embedding people in. I had some people over in Africa where we had my investigators embedded with the anti-human trafficking units over there in some countries, where they were actually acting as supervisors of the unit for up to 6 months until they were fully trained. And then we backed off and we just kind of monitored and mentored them to continue on with the programs. And so we've had success in those types of programs.
Wow, that sounds like a great plan. Yeah, you want it to equal success no matter where you go, especially for the survivors, for the children. We're trying to rescue as many people as possible.
And the key is Ren, I mean, we're not there, we're foreigners, we're there for temporary periods of time. We got to train up the locals, exactly. But we still have to hold them accountable long term to continue on, because if you're not there, checking in on them, they're going to go back to their previous activities. Creatures of habit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you for your answers. Shifting a little bit to the survivor side, and again, the next question, keeping it with confidentiality, in mind, and from what you guys can answer, what types of services and support do you offer, the survivors of trafficking? How do you ensure their safety, their well-being, even during recovery operations? We'll start with you, Ren.
So it really looks different for each case. No, there's no one size fits all for how to provide for a survivor. So, a child, 18-month-old CSAM victim is going to look a lot different than a 29-year-old sex trafficking victim that has children, or maybe a 32-year-old man that's in labor trafficking. It's going to look really different, right? So, but what we can provide, we're not psychologists and we're not set up to do that type of training, but what we can provide is the relationships to the people that can. So in the immediate, right after a rescue mission happens, in the immediate, if I'm on the mission, I like to communicate with the girls right away when we're doing those types of missions. Obviously, there's all different types of trafficking, but to keep it with sex trafficking, I'm right there to talk to the girls. But something that we implement is I want the male operators to interact with the women as soon as possible, because I want them to understand what a healthy male relationship is, what a healthy touch is, and how to be around men that aren't exploiting you. So that's something that we try to implement pretty quickly, even within the raid. So that's like initial interactions, right? After that, they're brought back to some type of safe home that's set up prior to the raid. And there will be our victim witness coordinators, women, most often women, that are trained to handle that initial encounter with them. So they're going to be set up with all these different dignity kits that have hygiene, clothing, pregnancy tests, other types of tests, and the girls will get that initial medical aid, make sure there's no immediate concerns with injuries on their bodies, and then we'll start getting the tests done for like pregnancy and STDs and stuff like that. So that transition process lasts a couple days to a couple weeks, and then they'll get transitioned into a longer term aftercare facility if that's what is best for them. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes we have women that are trafficked from another country. They know what's going on now. They want to go back and they have a good safety plan in place. Now, those plans still have to be vetted through us. We're not just going to set someone loose back in the country that exploited them. Right. So, for example, we had a survivor recently that she was recovered from a sex trafficking situation in one country. She was taken back to her home country. And she now owns a salon and is her own business owner. We provided for her to be able to do that. And one of the issues she had concerns with was safety. So we purchased security cameras and have them installed. And we have law enforcement that's able to look in on the security cameras and make sure that she's safe. And it looks so different. But then there's other victims that have been in aftercare, like a live-in aftercare facility for years. So it's very different, survivor to survivor, what's going to be best for them. It's not one size fits all. But those initial interactions, I can't say enough for them, because it is so powerful to see the survivors come to terms with what's happened and then look to you for guidance and to look up at you and to feel safe. You can see it in their eyes when that transition happens and that change happens. And that's why I like to involve both male and female operators, so that the women are getting used to, they're going to have to interact with men and women when they're back in society. So I want them to have that initial interaction with them.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I feel you're trying to get them to that, or give them that peace of mind, right? That they're going to be okay, and hence you can bring more technology like the cameras and stuff so they can feel safe. I can definitely understand that. Thank you.
Right.
Kevin, over to you.
Now, keeping in mind that we do cyber, so we don't deal with directly that much. I mean, I do travel internationally. I'm out with Lander some and some of these other groups, but for us, one of the main things, and it didn't really hit me quite so much, but if you think about the exploitation, even the trafficking, images, videos, the residue of that abuse and that misery that's been memorialized, this stuff continues to exist. So one of the things, we're working with another NGO, and their specialty is representing victims, representing survivors. So one of the things that we have done now, in conjunction with my prosecutor's office, we are conducting investigations into where images are being stored on sometimes major platforms. And a lot of these victims can go to these major platforms and say, my images are right there. I'm being re-victimized every day. I want these removed, and they'll ignore them. So this other organization has a herd of attorneys, and they're issuing takedown orders. So we're the investigative arm for that on the cyber side, and we're looking for more and better ways to conduct these investigations, because quite honestly, this is like whack-a-mole. We'll identify a few sites where these images are. They'll issue takedown orders, shut them down, or file a lawsuit against them. And then, a couple of weeks later, these same images are popping right back up. So that's one of the ways that we're supporting these survivors of trafficking exploitation, and it's just an overwhelming. And it's like I went with Ben. I showed up with Ben to see what we could do with this tornado, and I'm standing there, and the immensity of the damage that's done. And like, what can I do? Go pick up a piece of trash or pick up use a chainsaw. You need some major machinery. It's going to take a lot of people, a lot of time. And I feel like that sometimes in this, when you look at the sheer magnitude, these people have endured this abuse and these horrible things. And even if they're rescued, and even if they're recovered and they're given a new life and they're successful in that, there's still this horrible, this imagery and all this other stuff that's going to haunt them forever. So that's kind of been something I have really been looking into. How can we improve this more?
Yeah, no, great answer. It's a lot. It's overwhelming, right? It's us against the world sometimes, literally, and it could be at times it's just a lot to process, and that's us on our perspective. You can much more imagine what the survivors are going through.
Yeah, to go back to Ben, I was with down there with Ben and Jessica, and they have a lot of funding. And so I think all of us on this can talk about funding and say we don't have enough.
Oh,
it's super difficult.
Yeah.
But out of respect for Ben and Jessica, they showed up, and quite honestly, you're looking around thinking, what can I do? So they bought a couple of generators, and there were families there that had no electricity, they had nothing, windows blown out. They helped that one family. Here's a generator. So just one more. Sometimes we can get overwhelmed, but you got to look at, I can help one more person, just one more for right now. What can I do to help one person? And I think that's a key effort, and have a lot of respect for all you that are on here right now.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it. Yeah, just one more for sure. Jeff, over to you.
Sure. Yeah. When it comes to dealing with victims and victim recoveries, my position has always been I will not recover a victim unless there's a proper victim aftercare services available for them. Also, another thing I've learned through my years of experience, one of the organizations I used to work for, we did forcible extractions, and we found out about more than 70% of the victims were not being successful in aftercare. And so what I started doing is implementing, as I go in, acting as myself or my staff as decoy operators, collecting video, and then we would work with trauma counselors and trauma therapists to review, and so they would help us to identify some of the needs of the victims. And that was some of the process. I taught them elicitation skills to find out what their needs were, what's holding them back, what's keeping them in those positions. Because when we talk about chains, these are not necessarily physical chains, they're invisible chains, as they say, they're psychological chains. And so I also will not bring a victim out until they're ready to come out, because it's only going to cause more stress and trauma on that victim, and you're not going to really help them. So you leave them in place until things are ready, until they're in a position where they're ready to come out, and then they're going to be more successful. But a lot of times when we start getting a case, we immediately get aftercare. We get trauma individuals involved immediately from day one, whether it's a 1 week to a 6-month operation. We're updating them. They're involved in all the processes, so they know exactly what's happening. They help advise us and counsel us on how best to interact with these girls, what to ask, what to seek, and then how to gently lead them out to where they're ready mentally and emotionally to be recovered.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an imperative part, and it leads us right into our next question. Actually, like, what can you tell if there is people that know, or healthcare professionals that are watching, social service providers, people that might want to get into it, to ensure these coordinated responses to the trafficking or the exploitation, or even to combat it themselves, should do? What should they do? To better serve the survivors, to better fight all of this? We'll start with Ren again.
Sure. The best thing I could say there is to meet your survivor where they're at. Don't assume that some of them are a lot farther along in their recovery process, and you can talk to them more bluntly. You can communicate with them in more frank terms. Others haven't even accepted that they were trafficked yet. So really just meet them where they're at. Don't assume that they're ready to talk about everything, and don't assume that they don't want to talk about everything. So I've had survivors come up to me on day one and be like, this is what happened to me. This is where I'm hurting. How can you help me? And I have other ones that are like, I still owe a debt. I wasn't trafficked. I chose that. It's very different. So meet them where they're at. Don't come in thinking that you know what they're going to want to talk about. Let them guide the conversations. Let them work through that. For identifying, I think maybe what you were leading into is like identifying indicators. In healthcare and a lot of emergency room situations, I've had a lot of emergency room nurses and physicians talk to me about that, how they've noticed, and a lot of them are very good at it. If you're in the healthcare field, you care about people a lot. To take on that, I could never. It'd be overwhelming for me. But if you're in the healthcare field, especially in emergency healthcare, you have taken on a lot already and you care about people. So use those skills. When you notice that someone is in pain, but also in fear, obviously they're in the emergency room, emotions are heightened. But if they're also in fear, if there's someone that's near them and lingering by them, or they're coming in repeatedly, look into that. If you're wrong, you're wrong. That's okay. You're not, no one's going to get arrested if you're wrong. If you're right, you're really going to help someone. So don't be afraid to speak up. Don't be afraid to separate people. You use whatever terms, medical terms that we're not going to understand, make something up, separate people, call your local law enforcement, just have them standing by outside. You'll never be wrong for calling. You might be wrong for missing it and letting them walk out.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. Kevin, what do you think?
Boy, I don't know if I even know what the question is anymore.
I can ask it again, not a problem.
Sure.
When it comes to other organizations, stakeholders, social service providers, and healthcare professionals, to ensure coordinated responses or identifying trafficking or exploitation, or even combat it themselves, what do you think those professions should do?
Yeah, that again, my expertise right now lies in the cyber realm. So
Yeah, right.
I may just pass this on to Jeff. He can probably answer that.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely, Jeff, please. And next question is a really good one for all of you, I promise. But in your experience, Jeff, what would you say? Because you do, have that ability to reach even those students that you teach, right, in the master's program. What's your take on the professionals in this industry?
Yeah, no, I've taught, of course, I'm teaching at the university. I've also taught at many nursing schools. I've been, spoken with many medical centers and stuff on this as far as, detecting victims. It's not just detecting, it's identifying, it's looking for all the indicators. And so I do work closely with social service and healthcare providers from beginning of the investigation. We're talking about the investigation to help detect and identify, because they're not all visible. We talk about verbal and we talk about nonverbal indicators. We talk about personal agency. There's many things we can go into that goes outside the scope of this, but are critical to detecting and identifying victims. And so conducting a recovery operation, I think going back to that, we want to make sure that the social service providers, everybody's aware of it. And when it talks about the safety of the individual and how we balance that with the investigation, that is the challenge that everybody faces. And I can't say you can follow this every time, because it depends. If a person is not at risk and they're in a situation of exploitation and we don't have enough evidence to get them out and to do a conviction, then the reality, if we bring them out, that trafficker still operates, and all they're going to do is refill that position with somebody else who wasn't going to be exploited before. So in essence, you're perpetuating the trafficking cycle. Until we can get enough evidence, we're going to leave those individuals in place. We're going to work with them. We're going to offer them many types of services and be there for them available. But until we get enough evidence to actually identify and collect the information to prove the elements of the crime of trafficking, we're going to leave those in place. Now, I've been in accident circumstances where we were unable to get a victim out in time and she was murdered as she tried to escape, and a few other things we can talk about. However, unless it's a minor or someone whose accident circumstances which require the immediate intervention, I will leave them in place until we can fulfill that investigation. Unless as we go along, the danger increases or they're getting so desperate that they might try to escape, then we will speed up the process of conducting an intervention.
Yeah, wow, that's a lot to unwrap and consider. When you're in those situations and stuff that these professions need to kind of identify and look at. So, I'm definitely looking forward and working with you at New Haven, Jeff, for that HT cert stuff, man. It's really huge. The next question, everybody, and is like overarching, and I want you to think big, whether on the ops side, education side, the cyber side, right? So when it comes to training or educating programs, whether you offer it to law enforcement or any profession, how would you guys determine those long-term goals, and how would you measure success? Identifying those long-term goals and measuring the success, right? When it comes to training and educating what you specifically offer, ops, right? And the education side, the cyber side. What would you say to those people wanting to know more about that? What training can I offer my organization? What can I offer those that I work with to really help them identify or get into this industry or whatever it is they want to do to help inside of this? Brandon, we'll start with you.
Sorry, it froze there for a second. I think the question was the long-term goals of our organization, or what other people should be shooting for?
Right. So when it comes to like what type of training, because we each have our specific realm, type of training and education programs, you can offer, whether law enforcement, social workers, organizations that do the stuff that you do in your realm, and then would you guys measure success, if you do offer something like that?
Sure. So we do offer different degrees of training. So like we talked about, we offer a lot of training overseas, and we do the tactical training. We also do, training them on how to look for human trafficking, how to investigate it, and how to prosecute it. So we do a lot of that, and that's not just us. We're bringing other people into the fight with that. We've brought NCPTF with us, ICMIC, other organizations that are coming in, and maybe we're training in the field, and they've got them in the classroom, and they're talking to the prosecutors, or whatever that looks like. So we offer. We try to help offer, not to say a complete package, because that's not what we want, but we want to make sure that someone is there to provide them each step. Because say we provide the tactical training, but no one's there working with the prosecutors. Well, what are we really doing? Like Jeff said earlier, we need that prosecution and we need that investigation. So whether it's us providing it or someone else, what I would say in the long term is making sure that there is a cohesive strategy in that country, identifying country, or if there's a police department domestically that wants to do more work, identifying their weaknesses. Some organizations we go into, and their police are super well trained. Okay, we can kind of skip part of that step and move on to the next thing. Is that investigation? Is that prosecution? Is their aftercare really lacking? So identifying their weaknesses and then filling those gaps. How we identify success there, that's again really country specific and really operation specific. Success is, to me, just the awareness and them looking for the trafficking. Obviously, the gold standard is the prosecution, right? Prosecuting trafficking and getting survivors out, but we'll never be in this for a numbers game. I don't want a stacked list of, 10,000 survivors rescued, but 8,000 of them went back into trafficking and you didn't do any arrests. That's not what we're looking for. What we're looking for is that commitment, like I said earlier, that endurance, that those calls every week, those mission reports every month, that stuff that we're seeing where they're employing, maybe they only rescued one victim that month, but it was a great rescue and it was prosecuted from beginning to end, and it was investigated, and they're in aftercare, and that's what we're looking for, is the commitment, not just the numbers game, but the commitment to them from beginning to end.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you very much. It's a great answer. Kevin, on the cyber side.
Yeah, so on again, my background, I've been military, state, local, federal law enforcement, and I've been a prosecutor for about 12 years. So prosecutable cases is important. If you're thinking about this before, during, and after, we are engaged in the reactive space of something bad is happening. A child's being raped and videoed, and somebody's being trafficked. Somebody's missing. Something's happening. In that space, that's where we primarily operate. Now, if you look at the after part, the aftercare for bad guys is prosecution. If we can't finish what we start, these guys are never going to, there's never going to be a deterrent. There's never going to be anything stopping them. And there's already people stacked up waiting to come in. So we got to be able to finish that job. Survivors have to have this aftercare, as Jeff and Ren have already pointed out. You don't want to go do this rescue, this recovery like we did, say, 10 years ago. I'm kicking doors. We're doing all this stuff. Hey, we recovered 100 people. Where are they 6 weeks later? Right back where they started. What did we accomplish? I mean, it looked good for us, but then you start making the mistake, as Jeff and Ren have obviously done, of, hey, what happens to these people after we recover them? You know, that's been a big deal. So for us, the training has to be integrated with people, with what Jeff's doing, what Ren's doing, what some of these others are doing. So and you've got to make sure in each country that you've got the framework. In Pakistan, I was in Pakistan last month working with judges and prosecutors. They have done a tremendous job. They've taken the trafficking laws, and in 2018, they put the framework in. So quite honestly, if we were all to go over to Pakistan before 2018, they didn't really have the legal framework that for us to really go in and do anything. So yeah, each country is going to be different. They're going to have their own challenges. Last year, I was in a country that I won't mention. Interpol and ICMIC asked me to go in and took a team. And during the conversations with some of the decision makers, one of them actually said, well, you know, some of these women, they want to do this. They get paid well, and they have the pleasure of doing this all day. So how do you go in and start training prosecutors and everybody with that mindset? Sometimes you got to go in and you got to see where you're at, do an assessment, and you've got to start from ground zero in a lot of places. It's very, very dependent. Now, for us on the cyber side, I put my team up against any three-letter agency out here on the cyber investigation side of things. But you have to be able to put that along with the people on the ground. So next month I'll be in Thailand working with some operators on surveillance and some other things. We're integrating that all into the cyber. You know, so what you see out here, what can we do with it on the cyber side? Maybe it's a face, maybe it's a tag. Everybody's got to come together, put this training together, and you've got to take it all the way through prosecution.
Yeah, awesome, man. Very, very good. It's you never know. You're with that person in Pakistan. You're probably like you're definitely a client, you know, because they are people will appreciate. They're like, oh well, if they're okay with it, I get it, freedom of choice, you know. But it's like, you're not gonna help me very much, you know. You'll like really read somebody right away. So yeah, be safe out there, Kevin, for sure. And thank you for everything you do. Jeff, your thoughts?
Sure. I mean, when it comes to training, I mean, we all provide different kinds of training. I've got I can give you a catalog on the courses I teach and training programs I do. However, we got to break it down to what is the purpose of training. I mean, let's go back to why are we training? The training is for the purpose of training or altering a behavior or enhancing or improving an existing behavior or skill set. And so when I go back and thinking of, you know, how do we assess and measure impact of a program, whether it's a training program, it's a recovery program or anything else, you got to look at, you know, what are the variables that you may have control over. And so when you look at training, I look at training not, you know, are they passing the test? Are they attending? Do they do all their field assignments correctly? But measuring the implementation of the training. What are they doing after they're gone? And so I do a 6-month and a 12-month follow-up interview with a lot of the people I've trained just to assess if there's any barriers to implementation of the training I've given them. You know, and before I go in, as Ren and Kevin both said, you know, you need to kind of do a needs assessment. You also have to assess what the legal laws are, what the evidence laws are, and everything else. So you're in there training them on what they need and what they can use. I'll just give a simple anecdote. One time I was training the Polish National Police, and I was brought over there through the University of New Haven. And I talked with their people, say, what can you do? What can't you do? And so they told me what the restrictions were and everything. So I went up, did a whole week-long 40-hour course on undercover ops, intelligence collection, things like that. And I get there the first day, I start talking. They're like, we can't do any of this stuff. I'm like, well, the guy told me. Well, he was mistaken. He didn't really know himself. And so we went in there, and I was prepared for a 40-hour course on something they couldn't even, you know, execute in their country. And so you need to do those needs assessment and find out that they're capable of doing it, and make sure not only the officers, the line officers, but the command staff. I also do a separate training for commanders on leading and understanding what their investigators are doing and supporting them in that. And then, so 6 months, 12 months later, I do a follow-up call or email with them to fill out a simple survey of, have they been able to use the material? Has it been helpful? Have they any barriers to implementing, and what successes they've had? And so that gives me a good idea of where we're at on the spectrum of where we're going. As far as variables, I mean, we would love to also say prosecutions, but Ren, how many places have you been where the prosecutors don't want to touch it, they don't know it, or they're part of it? And so you have no control over prosecutions. All you have over is just delivering that information, getting in the right hands, and hoping and praying basically they're going to be able to take it all the way through, because we're not in charge of prosecutions. We're not in charge of getting it before the judge. And of course, the magistrates in some countries have no idea what human trafficking is. They don't even know their own laws. And so it's never going to get past that. So a lot of organizations are hung up on those things, but they can't be, because that will basically shoot them in their own foot by trying to do something that's beyond the scope of what they have control over.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot to cover, and to me, it comes down to trust factor sometimes. Like, are you willing to put it all out there, and assess it thoroughly, give them everything they need, and what are they really going to do with it, right? Is it just going to go to waste and you wasted all your man hours? And so, yeah, I completely understand and get that. Last question, everybody. When it comes to the latest and greatest technology, such as artificial intelligence, right? AI has the potential to play a significant role in combating trafficking, right? Data analysis, pattern recognition, image and text analysis, facial recognition, risk assessments, chat box, hotlines, victim rehab. I mean, you name it. This is an open question to anyone who wants to answer it. Do you want to speak on those positives, and or what do you think are the negatives when it comes to this all new AI craze?
Kevin.
Yeah, I thought that. So AI, yeah, AI. It's still. I mean, we're still nowhere near, the rise of the machines or anything, but it can't do the work that trained investigators. Quite honestly, the stuff that we're doing, I'm just applying, I guess you'd refer to it as old school investigative methodology and mindset with an understanding of technology. But for me, one of the problems that we're seeing with technology is we're allowing the media, we're allowing other people to set the language and set the stage. I really, really hate that my people are now including the word ethical. The ethical use of facial recognition. Like, what do we have unethical training that we're doing? But we're having to put this crap in because we're allowing some media. I was in the Hoover Institute, or I was in this panel discussion, and I won't get into naming names. One of them was, well, this lady was touched on this trail. I think maybe in California. And they did a Google geofence, this geofence search warrant, reverse location, and it came up with some devices that were there. And apparently an investigator named a name that they had narrowed it down. And of course, it wasn't that guy. I said, all right, well, let's go back to 25 years ago when I was working investigation and stuff. And I have the same scenario, but I go up and I have one of these people that's up there saying, oh, that sounds like my neighbor Fred. That's what he was wearing. He drives a vehicle sort of like that. And then the investigator named Fred is the suspect. It's not the technology. It's a misuse and a misunderstanding of the limitations of technology. So I just want to leave it with this. Technology comes down to two things. It's, leaving out the AI, which I don't think it's going to get there during my lifetime, maybe. But you have human and you have technology. Never, ever, ever can technology tell an investigator to go arrest somebody. Like you see some of these cases that involve facial recognition that, well, we ran this face through it and the algorithm told me it was this guy. Well, that's just a bunch of crap. That's laziness. That is not an investigator doing their due diligence. all that thing is doing is it's taking the space that you give it and it's going back and it's searching its database and saying, this is the closest thing I've got to it. So we also work with super recognizers out of the UK. So we may run one of our facial recognition technologies, come up with a group. Then sometimes I'll say, hey, super recognizer, can you take a look at these and narrow them down a little bit more? And even then, after those two steps, the investigator I'm working with, there is absolutely no doubt in that person's mind that what I'm giving them is not valid, it's not verified, they cannot use it. They then have to go through and do their own due diligence investigation and say, yeah, I found this mole, I found this tattoo, I found these environmental clues, I found something else to verify that before they take any action at all. So again, human and technology, we've got to depend on that human element, and no longer can technology and data providers just say, hey, cop, here's this technology, this super powerful thing, figure out how to use it. Because every damn one of them is going to go looking up an ex-girlfriend, an ex-wife, ex whatever, and they're going to do something stupid with it because we're human. And again, going back to the human side, but I'll stop rambling.
No, you're right on. Thanks. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah. No, I mean, sure. I totally agree with Kevin on this. AI, I've worked on some research projects with George Mason, where we were developing an AI shell to actually do an evidence-based questioning protocol to detect human trafficking victims who are in the process of being migration. And so these were individuals. So I worked with them. We created an app that we can use to help detect victims in the process of migration without them sometimes even knowing they're victims. However, AI is always based upon a learning process, and who puts that learning process in is human. And so my job was teaching this program what to look for, how to do it, how to question all these different things. And then the machine actually sorts through and determines what the proper questioning protocols will be, the formatting and all that stuff there. But ultimately, yeah, AI is ultimately programmed by humans and has to be taught by humans based upon their experiences, which were flawed. So basically, we're passing our flaws on to AI, which is going to be even further flawed. So there are some many limitations in that.
Yeah. Can't wait to see what the future holds. Bren, you want to give it a shot? What do you think?
I don't have much to say. I'm not much of a techie person. I will not hesitate to call Kevin if my computer so much as blinks. So I'm not much of a tech person, but what I can say is in the all-encompassing, I know you mentioned like recovery in there and stuff, where AI comes in, I think it'll always be too sterile to completely replace the human interaction, right? In this work, only love is going to save us now. Love for justice, love for the victims, love for the law, love for your fellow man. And AI can never replace that. No matter how good it is, like Jeff said, it is going to be flawed as well. So that human element is just never going to be able to be replaced. That contact, that touch, and that love, it'll always prevail.
Yeah, Jeff actually made me think of something else. So I wrote an op-ed on the ATII. One of the things that we want to have access, and law enforcement needs to have access to data, and things like the ATII have some concerning things that are in there that, right now, like this year alone, we've identified, I think around 100 kids that, these are cases that would have fallen through the cracks, but we're using some of the data and some of the methods that we have, the ATII, and going into the dark web stuff. And Jeff hit this earlier. Criminals share information. They share lessons learned. They talk. They communicate. They do really well. And one of the things like the ATII will allow people to go in and just remove their data. And after having told my kids for more than 10 years, anything you put out on social media, anything you send out into the wilds of the internet is not yours to control anymore. You have no expectation of privacy in it. We've told people that in the public for so many years, but the only ones I see actively doing this are the predators, and they have these dark web forums with their OPSEC, just like ISIS. We're looking at the terrorism side. ISIS, back in 2015, 2016, we got manuals of, hey, here's how you set your phone settings to avoid this. Here's this law that allows you to do these things. Here's how you do it. It's a checklist. That's where all this is going to be going. So I don't know what the answer is, and I know there has to be balance because there are victims on the privacy side, but that's one thing I would like to see is balance, because AI definitely, we need people like Jeff that's going in and training these things. He needs access to data. These researchers need access to the data, so that this AI can triage. And I do think that's a very valid, a very helpful thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's gonna be wild to see what technology does, you know, for the better, maybe even for the worse when it comes to in the realm that we work. Well, we could probably spend hours, days, even long,
Yep.
time just talking about the dark web and the crypto side of things as well, and survivors and how to fight, how to train, all of that stuff. Just want to tell you guys, thank you so much for taking the time, to chat with us here at the summit. And we're looking forward, of course, to seeing you guys down range in theater. And we're just here if you ever need anything. And I'm sure you'll get some questions for anybody that's viewing this. If you guys want to connect with them, they are on LinkedIn or their respective organizations. Contact either Ren, Jeff, Kevin, if you want more direct access or have more direct questions to them. Right. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you guys next time.
Thank you all.